So victims, I mean, your contention is that victims don't necessarily want to see the perpetrator killed, that it's not essential to their healing process, so to speak.
That's right.
Okay. I think that's one of the main things here in Nebraska that we hear when we have discussions about the death penalty. Another thing that we'll often hear is, you know, we need to be tough on crime, and the death penalty sometimes gets lumped into that statement. What do you think about that? I mean, is the death penalty tough on crime?
Well, the death penalty is tough on crime, but it's not the only thing that's tough on crime. And the question is, you know, do you just want to be tough on crime, or do you also want to be smart on crime? Is the goal, you know, for a symbol, which is very tough, like the death penalty, or is the goal for something actually effective that's going to keep the public safe and reduce crime? And I think given that choice, most people would prefer to actually reduce crime and keep the public safe. And in that level, the death penalty really fails. I mean, most states, including Nebraska, have the option of life without parole. If you were to get rid of the death penalty, you would have life without parole as a sentencing option for first-degree murders. And anybody who tells you that that's not tough on crime, you know, many people will say that's tougher than the death penalty, to spend the rest of your life in a tiny cell, getting 1 hour of exercise a day at the most, never being able to touch another human being, eating your meal 2 feet from the toilet. You know, I mean, it's isolating and depressing and lonely, and you lose all of your freedom. And a lot of people, you know, who've been in prison will tell you that execution is actually the easy way out compared to that kind of a future. So, you know, there's certainly no shortage of other tough on crime solutions that also don't have the same problems that the death penalty has.
What about the fact, and this is getting very specific to Nebraska, we have about 10 guys on death row. We've only executed a handful of people since the death penalty has been reinstated. So why spend time and resources focusing on this issue when I could be focusing on some other issue, maybe even relative to the criminal justice system? Why would we focus on this when it only affects 10 people in our state today?
That's a really good question, and I actually want to reverse it,
Okay.
which is why spend all of the time and resources that it takes to have a death penalty when you're only talking about 10 people on the row, a couple of executions. You know, the death penalty has been found to cost millions and millions more dollars than comparable non-death penalty cases. To maintain the kind of a system where you can have a death penalty, the extra procedures that are needed with the death penalty that are not needed for any other kind of system, the fact that prosecutors spend, you know, 10 or 20 years just working on one case to get that execution, when if it wasn't a death penalty case, they could be prosecuting hundreds of other cases. You know, all of that waste and effort for a system that's, for the most part, not executing anybody anyway, is all resources that could be going to effective law enforcement, effective crime prevention, helping victims, providing better services, and actually reducing crime.
I mean, I think that's, I mean, to me that's very clear. But there seems to be a disconnect between what I'm hearing a lot, you know, when people are opposed to the death penalty, and what took place in our legislature this year. You know, last year, the death penalty abolition bill was not, it was only one vote that separated it from being continued to be debated on the floor. This year, it was 4 votes that kept it. What do you think is happening between the people and their representatives when we're not hearing the kind of support for the death penalty on the street, maybe, as much as we are opposition? Do you have any theories about that?
You know, for the most part, I think that lawmakers are sort of the last to realize that the death penalty debate has changed in this country. You know, we hear, we go and work in a lot of different states, and what we hear around the country is, for the most part, the people who care about the death penalty are the people who want to get rid of it. The people who support the death penalty, you know, they don't care about it that much. It's not their banner issue. Nobody is winning or losing elections on the death penalty anymore. In the mid-90s they were, but now it is not a salient issue politically. But particularly politicians have such a long-term memory when it comes to an issue like this. And, you know, back 10 or 15 years ago, it was this political third rail, and they're sort of slow to catch up for the fact that it's not. And it really isn't anymore. And the evidence is there that it's not. And the people know that. And it's just a question of how long it takes to communicate to the legislators that that's the case.
You've given us a whole lot of reasons why someone should be opposed to the death penalty. And we have, for our upcoming election in our state legislature, we're going to have more than 20 new senators. Let's say that maybe 1 or 2 of them might be watching this show right now. How would you address them? I mean, what would you say what would be the arguments that you would really hit home with them as to why they shouldn't make the death penalty a major focus, or supporting the death penalty?
Supporting the death penalty,
Yeah.
major focus. You know, I would say we've learned a lot about the death penalty in the last 30 years. I mean, we've tried it. We've tried to create a system that doesn't execute the wrong people, that is handed down fairly and evenly, that doesn't cost too much, that isn't, you know, harming victims' family members. And we failed on every single count. And I think, you know, even 10 or 15 years ago, people who supported the death penalty may have done so with the best of intentions and believing that it was a good way to reduce crime or, you know, deal with murder. We now know with DNA evidence and so many other direct experiences that we've had that we just can't make it work. We've tried and we failed. So, you know, I would say to kind of take the learnings of the last decade and really apply that to public policy, and the only real solution is that getting rid of the death penalty is the only smart policy that there is.
I want to go back a little bit to speaking about Equal Justice USA, your organization, which I'm sure you're happy to talk about.
Sure.
Could you tell our viewers how they could find out more information about your organization, or if they wanted to make a contribution or anything of that sort?
Definitely. We are happy to take contributions at any time. We have a website, www.ejusa.org. And we actually have an email newsletter that goes out every 2 weeks called the Equal Justice Edition, which kind of chronicles, you know, sort of notes from the movement. It has both news stories and issues about the death penalty itself, but also kind of the grassroots story that's often not told in the mainstream press. You know, we've featured Nebraska in that before, and you can sign up for that on our website. It's just one email every 2 weeks.
What's your impression of Nebraska?
As a whole, or
as a whole, I mean, what you've seen, I mean, you've interacted with Nebraskans at least one national conference that I know of, maybe more. You're interacting with them right now as we speak. You know, you're in the middle of this strategic planning session with Nebraskans against the death penalty. What is your impressions of Nebraska and the abolition movement here?
Well, I think the movement here is incredibly sophisticated. I've been impressed from the moment that I started talking to people here. A lot of the lessons that I feel like has taken us several years to learn as a movement seem to be kind of second nature to a lot of the people here that I've met, which is very heartening. But also I think the Nebraskans that I've met as part of the abolition movement are just incredibly optimistic and really believe that the death penalty here is going to end and is going to end soon. And I think they're right. So that's been exciting. I mean, there's a lot of energy here, a lot of young people who are really involved, and you know, it may be the first issue that they've ever been very engaged in politically. People who are not that politically engaged, but you know, find the legislative process has been much more accessible than they expected. They can run into their lawmakers on the street or at the grocery store, and there seems to be just a real open conversation going on in the state that isn't always true in other places.